My name is Irvin Tepper, and this work of sleeping homeless people is something I've been doing since 1993. My pursuit on the street is not to so much as a sociological study, but the concept of people living on the street and vulnerable while they're asleep. So most of the work in this show, which spans, as I said, from '93 till the present, shows people sleeping and in places that are accessible to everyone. So many people walk by as I photograph, give me dirty looks, and later on though, they get to stare at the things that they avoid. And that was what interested me in the beginning. These particular prints in this show are all printed on vinyl, as if it was an outdoor poster, as opposed to a straight photograph, framed and put in a frame and shown that way. And that was also part of my concept, and to make them life-size. The homeless not only have increased in the number in New York, but they're more hidden. And though in recent years, in very recent months, I've started to notice more homeless in more public spaces. So it's something that goes up and down depending on how the police force and the city decides to deal with the laws dealing with the homelessness. And sometimes people get picked up and put in shelters, but there's a number of people which I call kind of urban landscape people who are always going to live outside, no matter what the situation is. The notion of people leaving their house and dealing with the homeless, they try to ignore it as much as possible, and that's what also interested me when I photographed them, that I could photograph people stand in front of them. Actually, I'm embarrassed when I'm standing in front of a sleeping person taking their photograph without their permission, without any kind of consciousness of what I'm doing, and never to be seen again. So and this show, I've noticed at the opening of this exhibition, many people staring at things they would never allow themselves to stare at while they're walking down the street, particularly in New York. And there's a homeless in Houston. I'm in Houston now, and there's a number of homeless people here that are hidden away. I think the politicians in every city I've ever been in would love to see them off the street. And interesting to note that when New York City had a Democratic convention that nominated Bill Clinton, there was no homeless people on the street. Everybody had been removed. It was amazing how the city was without any kind of urban living that wasn't in an apartment or a house. It's such a difficult issue because on one hand you want them to have facilities to bathe and toilets available, and I think it's a mixed bag. Some cities have designated certain areas unofficially for homeless to gather, where they're not basically hassled by the authorities. And in the parts where there are the wealthy, and particularly New York City, they're removed. Now the churches have made an accommodation for the homeless to sleep on the steps of the church, and I think sometimes aid them as well in food, but generally speaking, and I also noticed that uptown on the Upper East Side of New York City, there's plugs in the street, and I noticed some homeless people plugging their telephone, the ones that had telephones, into the street sockets to charge up their batteries. So I thought that was an interesting phenomenon. I don't think it was designed for them. They definitely use it. Well, part of my compositions have to do with how I also photograph objects that I make, and I've been photographing objects and things on tabletops since I started in art. And I only have a few seconds in front of any homeless person because of I don't want to wake them, and I certainly don't want to get in any hassles with any of them. So I only have a few seconds. So sometimes I'll stand back, look at the situation, and then kind of predetermine in my mind what I'd like to see in the photograph and what angle I want to take it at, and use a flash, not flash, because some of these shots are at night. And then when I get actually in front of them, it's just a matter of maybe 5 seconds, maybe. And sometimes it's one photograph. Generally speaking, I'm only getting one shot. I'm not getting 1 or 2 or 3 photographs. It's usually just one shot, and then that's it. So, but sometimes if I'm lucky, if they look really asleep or they look well hidden, then I can take my time. But that's very rare. Well, when I photograph the homeless, I'm also interested in not only the sociological context in which they're homeless and on the street, but I'm also interested in how and what kind of like living sculptures they become in an odd way on the street. And so that's part of my objective too, is that it becomes not necessarily negative but positive. You have this positive living sculpture, if people would look at it that way. And unfortunately, they don't look at it that way. And you know, I just go ahead and continue to photograph them. I'm also interested in the idea of the fragility of their lives on the street and so vulnerable. And I think that in life, hope is a situation that is the last thing to go in a person's life. So I look at it that way too, that they continue to live on the street in horrible conditions and keep going. And that to me is something I find admirable, at the same time admirable in the sense that they have no choice and that they continue to figure out how to deal with it. So that's part of, it's a curiosity more than a kind of a quest for a message. When I started this series, I also photographed trash on the street as well, and the arrangement of trash. But I started to focus in on the homeless and how they use objects they found on the street as shelter. And one of the things they use is the cardboard boxes or cardboard pieces that they use to sleep on. And the cardboard itself has a tremendous durability that I think a lot of people don't realize. And they're able to move them around, set up temporary shelters. They're sheltered from the rain. And I'd say like 60 or 70% of the photographs I shoot are people that have cardboard somewhere in their little environment that they sleep in. The sculptures that are in this exhibition and a photograph, some blown up Polaroid photographs I took of a homeless person who made organization of thrown away objects on the street in Houston, Texas, in the 2nd Ward, and we called Stack Man. And in this exhibition, Jesse Lott was able to give me some work that this man had produced during the time he lived in the 2nd Ward, that he had picked up from the street after they removed him and tore down the lot that he did a great installation in. So the exhibition I'm doing now is dedicated to that person, we call Stack Man. And I let people see the work that some of the things he produced, not in the context that I'd like to show it, which is on the street, but also in photographs you can see how some of these objects were placed, and a picture of himself and his cart. Yeah, I mean, this exhibition that I'm doing in Houston, Texas, was curated by Ann Herethus, who allowed me to go ahead and to present this work under her sponsorship and her great visual sense. And there was a number of people that worked on this show that need to be thanked because I couldn't have done it alone. For example, the photographs which are printed in Houston, Maurice Roberts did a lot of work, a lot of legwork for me while I was in New York, and helped secure the printer and print out some of the Polaroids. Jesse Lott, who needs a tremendous thanks for helping me secure a fence that was buried in the ground for 10 years, and also introduced me to the work of Stack Man, which led me on this quest of the homeless. And a number of other people, Jim Herethus, who's always had a tremendous influence on me and discovered my work and brought me to Houston in the first place. And Tom Isdale, who drove me around, and Jose Garcia, who did all the heavy lifting. I have to thank him as well. And Barney Mills, who did the lighting. So all those people played an important role in putting this show together at the Project Row House.